Alex, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and the talk before we start properly?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Um, so a little bit about my background. I currently work in the nuclear industry and have done for the last 6.5 years. I'm a chemist by background. I studied at my undergraduate master's at Kingston University in London and a PhD in materials chemistry at the University of Central Lancashire. And I am currently studying an MSc in Leadership and Management Practice at Liverpool John Moores University, which is where the fascination for culture within the nuclear industries come from. Um, Today's talk is going to be relatively short in comparison to previous talks that have happened. Mainly, I've not been well, so I've not been able to extend this talk as much as I would have hoped to. But I hope that it's still engaging, interesting, and will spark some interest. And I would be happy to come back at a later point and give another talk and go into a further detail. Um, Also, just a point to say, I will be stepping into Peter's shoes from this year, March or April, um, as Peter steps away from doing the online talks. Um, so big shoes to fill.
Okay, thank you very much, Alice. So I'm very pleased to introduce Alice Holman, who will take over from me as of the March talk, which will be on Wednesday, the 18th of March, I think it is. Um, Instead of the previously normal time of Tuesday, that's because Alice can't make Tuesday, but on the 18th of March, Alice will take over from me, and the first speaker she have will be Alan Dronfield. Anyway, so a good warm welcome to Alice. She's going to be talking to us today about the historic culture of the nuclear industry, a student perspective. Alice, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So hello and welcome to everybody. I'm Alice Holman, and as Peter said, I'll be giving a talk today on the historic culture of the nuclear industry, a student's perspective. Before I start, I'd like to make a disclaimer that any views expressed in this presentation are solely my own and do not reflect the views of any of the organisations which may be mentioned in this presentation. I give this talk as an individual who is interested in the nuclear industry and its culture, and not in my capacity as an industrial professional. Although I work in the nuclear industry, this presentation has been put together in my spare time as a personal interest piece and contains information readily available in the public domain. Um, so, as I introduced myself earlier, I've worked in the nuclear industry coming up 6.5 years. I'm a chemist by background, and I'm currently studying an MSc in Leadership and Management Practice at Liverpool John Moores University. So that's where the fascination for this topic has come from. Although our knowledge of chemistry spans many centuries from its origins in alchemy, nuclear chemistry is comparatively very young. Yet the prevalence of its history appears to be becoming more popular over recent years, like the TV series Chernobyl, the film Oppenheimer, and the recent game set in an alternative history of the Lake District atom fall. So I want to take you on a little exploration of the culture within the nuclear industry. I hope you find it interesting as we embark upon the question, is it chemistry which drives nuclear culture, or is it nuclear culture which drives the chemistry? So when I say the words nuclear industry, what images come to mind? Do you think of the glowing radioactive rod from the opening credits of The Simpsons? Or is it the fiery mushroom cloud from Oppenheimer? Perhaps being a scientific community, your thoughts travel to the more theoretical, how a collision between subatomic particles can lead to a release of energy and perpetuate a chain reaction, or the impact of the nuclear accidents of the Three Mile Island, Fukushima, and Chernobyl. Whilst you ruminate on these, let me take you on a whistle-stop tour of the nuclear industry and remind you just how young it is. So it's been 130 years since radioactivity was discovered, and 123 since Becquerel got the Nobel Prize for it, alongside Pierre and Marie Curie. Um, it's been 81 years since the first nuclear weapons were detonated, and 70 years since the first commercial power station in Calder Hall, which is up in Cumbria at Sellafield. It's been 40 years since the nuclear accident, which was Chernobyl, and yet it's only been 4 years since the UK's nuclear reprocessing ceased, the Magnox reprocessing plant at Sellafield. So by now, your thoughts have had time to sink in, and I can introduce you to the concept of culture. Shine defines it as learned patterns of beliefs, values, assumptions, and behavioral norms. So what does this mean? He broke it down into three aspects: artifacts, espoused values, and basic assumptions. So artifacts are the visible elements, the things you can see. This can be the dress code in an office where everyone wears a suit and tie, or in the nuclear industry, it might be the personal protective equipment, your PPE. It's also the symbols, the company logos. Why you pay extra for a Breitling watch or a Chanel perfume. You're paying for the brand, the label, the artifact. You're buying into the culture. Underneath artifacts come espoused values. These are the stated mission and values, the code of conduct and expressed ideas or goals. They are what give you confidence when you work for a company or make a purchase at a particular shop. I value the environment, so I choose to shop at a company which declares its values. It values the environment. I value ethical farming, so I choose an organization who declares they are fair trade. These go hand in hand with the artifacts. I know a company is embedding its values if, for example, it uses 100% recycled packaging and claims to value the environment, or if my bar of chocolate bears the fair trade symbol. Underneath these come the basic assumptions. These you cannot see. They are the unconscious, deeply held beliefs, much harder to pinpoint. I asked you at the beginning to think of the images you associate with the nuclear industry, the symbols. In doing so, I expect many of you had a thought or feeling about the nuclear industry. You may consider it to be dangerous, given the consequences of the nuclear accidents which have occurred. You may consider it to be the future, a cleaner and more reliable energy source to replace oil and gas. These are your basic assumptions, your inner held beliefs. Hofstadter believed culture within an organization is shaped by the national culture. His research was all focused on a single organization, but covered over 40 different countries. Hofstadter considered an organization's culture to be determined by another external culture. In this case, he considered it to be national. I'd like you to consider whether this can be true of the nuclear industry. Is the culture of nuclear organizations such as EDFE, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, Rolls-Royce SMR, are they defined by the organization themselves, or is their culture shaped by the culture of the nuclear industry? There are a few different aspects of culture within the nuclear industry, but I'm going to focus on safety and security culture today. Safety and security culture is particularly prevalent in the nuclear industry, as the activities an organization performs often carry high consequences if done incorrectly. This drives values of learning from experience, both within and external to an organization. For example, the formation of the World's Association of Nuclear Operators, or WANO, was a response to the nuclear accident at Chernobyl. This is a non-profit organization which puts safety at their core and supports its members, who are operators of nuclear power plants, and it aims to communicate effectively and share information openly amongst its members with a focus on learning from experience. Safety and security culture can also incorporate a compliance and control approach, where there is a low risk appetite and a propensity for single loop learning, which is the actions are adjusted based on results. This culture puts the responsibility on the stringent processes and procedures in place. These are then subjected to external regulatory scrutiny and interventions, which builds further confidence. If an error occurs, it is typically the process or procedure which has a shortfall. It must not have been robust enough. External regulators can be, and in the case of WANO are, international. There are national regulators such as the Office for Nuclear Regulation, ONR, in the UK, but the recognition of safety and security for nuclear science brought about the world's central intergovernmental forum, the International Atomic Energy Agency. They also act as a regulatory body for safeguards, ensuring nuclear states are adhering to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Safety and security culture is also important to the public. People need to know that the nuclear facilities in their country are safe and secure, and the organizations need to demonstrate this is the case and remain transparent should this ever change. So, to return to our original question, is it chemistry which drives nuclear culture? Or is it nuclear culture which drives the chemistry? The chemistry and inherent hazardous nature of the nuclear industry certainly drives the nuclear culture of safety and security. As research and understanding develops, so does the safety and security principles. The implementation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the formation of the IAEA safeguards, and the formation of WANO are all examples of iterative learning. However, the development of small modular reactors and the governmental decisions on geological disposal are perhaps driven by the nuclear culture. The confidence in the safety and security of the nuclear facilities and management of the hazards and organizations being able to demonstrate low risk provides the public support for the nuclear industry to continue its scientific development. This confidence is key. So is it chemistry which drives nuclear culture, or is it nuclear culture which drives the chemistry? The answer is a bit of both. Thank you very much. And if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to let me know.
Okay, Alice, thank you very much for that talk. I've asked for questions in chat, but we haven't had any so far. If anybody has any questions, please put them in, and I'll make sure to get asked. Alice, there's one question that occurred to me in particular, and that is the culture of the nuclear industry must surely be affected by the fact, I assume, that only people who are willing to work with nuclear power are in it. Now, I mean, this is a kind of unusual situation because I suppose you could say that people opposed to chemistry don't take up chemistry, but there are obviously lots of chemists and physicists, I assume, who are not happy to work for whatever reason, and not happy to work in the nuclear industry. So I'm wondering how that might affect the culture.
That's an excellent question, Peter. Thank you. I think there are several elements. One of them is the location and the history. So, for example, up in Cumbria, the actual culture of the locals is quite pro-nuclear because Sellafield and before that it was BNFL has been around, so it's built that confidence with the people because either they work at a nuclear facility or for one of the supply chain, or they know someone or a relative that has worked there. And also, I think there's an element of interaction and social impact that these organizations have, whereby they give back to the community and they educate the community, so they will, you know, be involved in exhibitions and outreach so that it becomes part of a united culture of the community, becomes part of the wider organizational culture. And I think there is with nuclear, there is obviously the safety and the security aspects, but also there's I guess a divisive culture where some people are willing to work at nuclear facilities that are specifically working towards remediation and cleanup of our historic operations, or that which is very much focused in the civil area, and obviously the recent governmental decision to look at immobilization and to go forward with the geological disposal facility in the near future means that people are more willing to work in the industry because they know that they are removing that hazard and preventing us from having any additional capability for weapon use, and it is going to be immobilized.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, do you think the whole issue of climate change has also made some people more willing to work in the nuclear industry since it's obviously carbon free, at least in terms of its output? Of, I dare say, it probably uses a lot of carbon in construction.
I definitely think that's part of a consideration. I know that when I've spoken to the younger generation looking, so your early careers, those that are looking for positions within the nuclear industry, sustainability has been very high on their list. It's been, working towards either a cleaner, from a carbon perspective, type of energy, or taking the existing nuclear facilities and bringing them to a cleaner state, and remediating them and getting back to fallow ground, or restoring and reducing that high hazard has been very important to them. But sustainability is definitely a key feature that is coming through our early careers people.
Interesting, interesting. I have two questions here. Which in fact, the first one of which addresses basically the point you've just been making, which is, do you regard nuclear fuels, for example, uranium, as fossil fuels? And how can nuclear fueled electrical generation be regarded as clean? That's the question.
Thanks. I believe that was Clifford. I personally,
Do you know? No, right, okay.
no, I personally do not believe nuclear fuels are fossil fuels. Um, I think coming from a pure chemistry background, um, the the amount of energy that you can get out of nuclear power is so much more efficient than fossil fuels. And I think it is, as I've discussed in the talk, it's still a relatively young kind of field of chemistry that with time, we're working on small modular reactors, and you compare that to the very first power plant that we built, and it's come on, leaps and bounds. So I expect as time goes on that we will only, improve and become more efficient and be able to develop far more energy efficient nuclear reactors, and that it will be, far cleaner than fossil fuels. I'm not sure because of the decommissioning element and managing that waste afterwards, whether I would consider it as clean. However, I also know there are things like when we talk about solar panels and wind generation and more of that renewable energy sources, that they are also in their infancy. And so we don't necessarily have a way forward in terms of, with solar, how we dispose of them. So I think whether we currently have effectively a clean energy, I don't know whether whether I agree with that at the moment across the board of all our energies. But I do think nuclear is certainly cleaner than fossil fuels.
Yeah, good. That raises a question, which is only just after, it's not really connected to this directly, but there was a lot of talk about, what, 20, 15 years ago, about inherently safe nuclear reactors, which, as I recall, had nuclear fuel in kind of ping pong ball size unit that were inherently safe because if they heated up, all the ping pong balls would fly apart rather than melt down. Is that anything that's been worked on at the moment?
I'm not sure myself. It's not a field that I've got much experience in.
Mm.
It's definitely something I can take away, Peter, and see if I can find out some
Okay.
information and get back to you.
But it's interesting, but they're still sticking to the large conventional reactors rather than coming up with new technology. I mean, even the small scale technology is basically from nuclear submarines, but there we are. Um, okay, two more questions. Mike Jewett, who happened to live near Harwell, actually, said, I was interested in the reference to Winston Churchill in 1927, even before the Cockcroft and Walton experiment of 1934. Do you have any detail?
Unfortunately, Michael, I do not have any details, any further details on that at the moment. I can take that away and have a look and get back to you. Like I said, I was off sick recently, so I wasn't able to do all the background kind of underpinning research that I would have liked to.
No, no. Yes, yeah. I must say, Alice has been very unwell, so it's good that she's with us today. Now, Nigel says, I visited Calder Hall just after commissioning. Gosh, that was a long time ago. We're close to Windscale when it had its whoopsie. I think that was 1961, was it? The culture since then has changed to one more carefully aligned bucket dictated by the USA. Do you think, when do you think this major change was effective?
Um, I'm just wondering, Nigel, whether you could give me a little bit more detail, um, and what you mean exactly by more closely aligned by the USA exactly.
Uh, Nigel, can you put that in chat and I will relay it? We'll see if we confirm that. But yes, yes, there was a very famous study of the Wind Girl incident by a famous historian of science, but I forget his name now.
Um,
Forget his name now.
I
But
know for the historic stuff, Lorna Arnold has written
yeah,
a book on the history of nuclear, and that
well,
should be, I believe that's available in the public domain.
yeah. Well, of course, my former supervisor many years ago, Margaret Gowing, wrote the original history of the nuclear power in Britain in two volumes. Nigel hasn't come through yet. But Clifford Wharton says, is extracting of uranium ore any cleaner, in inverted commas, than coal mining?
I'm honestly not sure, Clifford. I've not been working in that kind of area of the nuclear industry. I've been more on the end kind of reprocessing and storage side of things personally.
Hmm. You can't undo everything. Okay, well, Nigel hasn't got back. Nigel, can you come back to us on the alignment with the USA? Maybe he doesn't really know. See if he's still around. It should be. Uh, yes, he's around, but no responses yet. No. Um, we've got one you. Yes, Nigel come through. Uh, the USA was trying to force us to go for what seemed safer systems, but we resisted as long as possible. I assume this was back in the 60s.
Um, I guess I'm still not. I guess I'm not sure exactly what the major change was in terms of when you're talking about safer systems. I know that
What was
the
the,
the
when was
UK and
safer? Sorry, Alex. But when would the nuclear expectorate, when would the nuclear expectorate set up?
As in the World Association of Nuclear Operators, or the International Atomic Energy Authority, or
No, no, I mean the British Nuclear Inspectorate. There is a nuclear inspectorate in there of nuclear facility for safety.
um,
Like the factory inspectorate. I'm aware
so
about
we
that.
we
What was
yeah,
the
from a regulation point of view, we have the Office for Nuclear Regulation.
Okay.
Um, I cannot off the top of my head remember um, when they
Yeah.
came into force. Um, but I know from we have a good relationship between the UK and the US Department of Energy. So there is quite a lot of collaboration between the two countries and sharing of that learning from experience. In terms of culture, I was lucky enough to actually visit um, part of the United States back. It was 6 years ago now, just before COVID, and they have, I think, from a culture point of view, they have a different approach, or at least the site that I visited had a different approach um, to culture in terms of security. So we have a lot of we have a small amount of space, and so we have a lot of security fences and protocols and procedures and physical security. Whereas obviously in the US, they have far more land, and their nuclear power, well, the nuclear site that I visited was out in the effectively in the sticks in the middle of nowhere. And although the actual facilities took up about the same as what we would have on one of our nuclear sites, the actual land footprint was far higher. And you required cars to travel around the site, whereas for us it's a lot easier to be able to walk just from the nature. And obviously, if you're taking cars onto site, that's a lot more of a well, it includes an increase in security risk compared to just having personnel.
Interesting. Could that be the result of being a much bigger country, of course, and a much less populated country in terms of density? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what, if I may ask, if it doesn't contravene any official secret, what was the site that you visited?
It was the Savannah River site in South Carolina.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, yeah. Uh, there's a very interesting question because presumably that's near a river and 3 Mile Island is near a river. I mean, is there ever a tendency to put a nuclear power station near a river?
That's a good question. Um,
I mean, I mean, Sellafield didn't, did it? And wrote near the
no,
sea.
but
We
it is
tend to
on
put them near
the
the sea.
coast. It is near the coast.
No.
Although I would argue anywhere that you would look to have a nuclear facility in the United Kingdom, you're either going to be next to the sea or a river because we're such a small island.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
I don't know whether it would come down um, to the geographical kind of location that certain areas will be less populated. And I would wonder if you had a look at the geography, whether that would mean um, next to rivers that we're not building metropolitan cities because they would be, would be unable to grow. So whether that's part of the factor, but again, I wouldn't know. It's not something I've looked into.
Mm. I'm coming back to the whole question of culture and security. Presumably, one important element is being careful of one's personal safety and using the right personal protection.
What was the question?
Well, if
Sorry,
you're
Peter.
working on a nuclear plant, you
Hmm.
presumably have a high degree of having to protect yourself in terms of what your PPE and so on.
Yes, obviously. However,
Mm.
we follow the hierarchy of control. So PPE is your last measure of control, and that you would implement other things before you get to PPE.
Right. But there must be a whole culture involved with that. I mean, the very fact that you say that PPE is your last measure of control shows that you're always thinking in terms of a hierarchy of protection. I mean, I suppose that happens in any chemical laboratory, but I doubt if it happened to the same degree of thought, if it were.
Yeah, I mean, thinking from a chemistry background, we look through if you're in the lab and you're doing any experiments, you look to see whether you can reduce or remove the hazards.
Mm.
Um, if you're going to be using something toxic or carcinogenic, can you replace it with a substitute that is safer? Um, and it's no different in the nuclear industry. Um, I think the difference or part of the difference in culture between where we were in the 40s and 50s compared to where we are now is that we are thinking ahead. So when we were in the 40s and 50s, production was very much king, and work was ongoing to see whether we could increase production and um, how much could we do in how short a time and still be safe. But we weren't necessarily giving much thought to how we would look at decommissioning and removing and storing the waste later on. Whereas now, when we look to commission a nuclear reactor, the
Mm.
decommissioning and remediation of that site has to be incorporated into the proposal. So we're not allowing ourselves, and we're learning from the experience, we're not going to put ourselves in a position where we have all this legacy waste and novel challenges of what do we have and how do we manage it. We've already looking at dealing with it before we've started, building on the ground and producing the waste in the first instance.
Mm. Mm. That's very good. I mean, obviously, that's a high degree of preparation, foresight, if it were. Anne Green has just sent the message that I recently had a tour of Haysham 2 and was impressed by the culture regarding security and safety visible to visitors. There was a great emphasis on local employment and interface with the general public. Any comment on that?
It's good to hear, Anne. I'm obviously based up in Cumbria, but from what I've seen, the what you're saying of Heysham and the interface between the general public and local employment is very much what we have up here. Um, and I think what we will see from a culture perspective is as the government lays out plans for where we might site the geological disposal facility, there will be certain areas that either are not, that have the land available to be developed on to produce a geological disposal facility, but also I wouldn't be surprised if they are areas that already have some sort of nuclear footprint because of that interface between the employment and general public, that they're, as I said, the confidence between the public and that transparency and the education between the public and the nuclear organizations is far more mature than in an area where, oh, they think nuclear's far away up in the north, tied, tucked in the heart of Scotland or something. Um, those that have nuclear on their doorstep are far more educated and often more supportive.
Yeah, interesting. Nigel made two comments. The first one is he asked if Haitian 2 is the one that's just been declared nuclear free.
I would have to check. I know one of the stations has recently defueled, but I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head.
And the other one is that he made is that there's a similar ethos to Hinkley Point, a similar ethos to Haitian 2, that is. and
Mm.
also just making no comment. And somebody else had made a comment, and it's perfectly true, of course, and I was thinking about it when I was asking about the rivers, but we actually do need cooling water. They need water from somewhere.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Okay, Alice. Well, I think this will be perhaps a good time to draw things to a close, and thank you very much for this very interesting talk on an unusual subject. Not many of us know about the culture of the ukulele industry, so I'm sure that it was new to many of us. So thank you very much, Alice, for coming along and telling us about it. And it's always useful to have the first-hand experience. And if one of you comment, it may just be a thank you. Okay. Anne Green says Haitian 2 is active, and I understand it's Haitian 1, which has been decommissioned. Okay. Haitian 1, not Haitian 2.
Okay.
So, so that just shows the complexity of the whole thing. And so thank you again for talking to us, and I look forward to you taking over from me in March, Alice. So thank you very much for that as well. And thank
Thank
you
you very
very much,
much, Peter.
everybody, for coming today. We look forward to next month, the third Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. When I will be talking about the Easter drinkers of Ireland, another slightly unusual topic. And then in March, Alan Dronfield will be talking, and then at that point, Alex will take over from me. So for now, I hope you all have a good afternoon, and thank you once again to Alex for giving us a wonderful talk. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye for
Thank
now.
you very much. Bye,
Not
Peter.
all, Alex.